Welcome to Past Paradise, where the spotlight cuts through Hollywood shadows. Rob Reiner's son Jake has stepped forward with revelations that challenge the carefully polished image the industry tried to protect. In the wake of his parents' tragic deaths and the shocking arrest of his brother Nick, Jake's voice carries a weight that cannot be ignored. His hidden truth exposes the fractures behind the glamour, peeling back layers of secrecy long buried beneath red carpets and studio lights. What he shares isn't just family tragedy, it's a glimpse into the darker corners of Hollywood's legacy. Rob Reiner's final words left Hollywood in complete silence. Rob Reiner has spent more than 5 decades shaping Hollywood from both sides of the camera, and by 2025, his reflections on legacy grew noticeably more candid and quieter. Best known early on as Meathead on All in the Family, Reiner pulled off one of television's rarest feats, escaping a beloved sitcom persona to become a defining filmmaker of modern American cinema. Between 1984 and 1992 alone, he directed This Is Spinal Tap, The Sure Thing, Stand By Me, The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, Misery, and A Few Good Men, a run film historians still call one of the most consistent hot streaks any director's ever had. Nerdy side note, Spinal Tap didn't just influence comedy, its improvised style quietly reshaped mockumentaries long before The Office existed. In recent interviews, Reiner has spoken less about box office wins and more about responsibility, artistic, moral, and generational. He's openly acknowledged misfires like North in 1994, often cited as one of Hollywood's most infamous critical failures, using it as a lesson in humility rather than denial. Politically outspoken in later years, he's also stressed that filmmakers shouldn't confuse volume with impact, admitting that sometimes the most powerful statements are the ones left unsaid. What struck many insiders wasn't a dramatic farewell speech, but Reiner's calm insistence that his work should speak after he stops directing. No grand exit, no victory lap, just a filmmaker quietly stepping back, leaving behind characters, dialogue, and scenes so ingrained in pop culture that Hollywood didn't know how to respond. And for once, it stayed silent. Born into comedy. The truth about Rob's childhood in Carl Reiner's shadow. Rob Reiner's final public statement stunned Hollywood, not because it was loud, but because it was deeply personal, reflective, and completely unfiltered. In November 2025, just weeks before stepping away from public life, Reiner gave a rare, unscripted appearance at the American Cinematheque's 40th anniversary tribute. Standing before a crowd that included old friends like Billy Crystal and Tom Hanks, he emotionally reflected on the arc of his career, not his hits, but his regrets. "We spent so much time chasing box office numbers," he said. "I wish we'd spent more time making moments that mattered beyond the screen." He referenced Stand By Me, calling it the closest I ever came to healing my own wounds, and admitted that the bucket list felt too real too soon after losing friends like Nora Ephron. His most shocking admission? Reiner said he never got over his falling out with longtime friend and All in the Family co-star Sally Struthers, revealing they hadn't spoken in over a decade. That line left the room in stunned silence. Later that evening, he reportedly handed his son Nick a sealed letter, meant to be read only when I'm truly gone. While his health hasn't been officially diagnosed, insiders confirm Reiner was battling chronic heart issues for years. At 78, the beloved director's final words weren't about film, they were about legacy, family, and forgiveness. And Hollywood, known for noise, had nothing to say back, just silence and a standing ovation. Young Rob Reiner wanted to be a baseball player, not a director. Before becoming the mind behind When Harry Met Sally and A Few Good Men, young Rob Reiner had his heart set on something far from the director's chair. He wanted to be a professional baseball player. Growing up in Beverly Hills in the 1950s, Reiner idolized Brooklyn Dodgers legends like Jackie Robinson and Gil Hodges. In fact, his room was filled with baseball cards, not movie posters. According to interviews Rob gave as recently as 2023, he played first base throughout school and even considered trying out for college-level teams before fate redirected him. Ironically, it was his father, legendary comedian and filmmaker Carl Reiner, who gently nudged him away from the diamond and toward the stage. But Reiner didn't go easily. He recalled in a 2021 podcast that during one of his earliest acting gigs, he skipped a rehearsal to catch a Dodgers game, and his dad was not amused. Still, baseball never left him. Reiner later fused that passion into film, most notably in The Princess Bride, where he slipped in subtle nods to teamwork and heroism akin to his favorite sport. And fun trivia, Rob once owned a stake in the now-defunct minor league San Bernardino Spirit baseball team in the 1980s. While he never made it to the majors, Reiner's storytelling ended up hitting home runs in a different way. He once joked, "If I couldn't swing the bat, I'd swing the camera instead." And Hollywood's been grateful for the switch ever since. Why his parents sent him to an all-boys boarding school. Rob Reiner's larger-than-life personality might seem like a natural product of Hollywood, but his early years were more complex and surprisingly structured. At just 14, his parents, comedy legend Carl Reiner and jazz vocalist Estelle Reiner, made the unexpected decision to send him to the prestigious all-boys boarding school, Cranbrook School, in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. This wasn't punishment, but a proactive move. By the early 1960s, Rob had become, in his own words, a troublemaker with a cause, restless at Beverly Hills High and clashing with authority figures. Carl, ever the disciplined writer-director, saw Rob's potential but also knew the temptations of LA's glitzy distractions. So he shipped his son across the country to a cold, quiet school with no Hollywood buzz and strict rules. Cranbrook, known for shaping creative minds, it also educated filmmaker George Booth, gave Rob a reset button. He later admitted in interviews that the experience gave him structure, though he resented it at the time. Ironically, the school also introduced him to acting with its robust theater program, something he had avoided despite growing up on the Dick Van Dyke Show set. The boarding school exile gave Reiner an appreciation for solitude, discipline, and storytelling. He'd eventually use those same qualities to direct deeply introspective films like Stand By Me. And fun fact, Rob jokingly called Cranbrook my personal Alcatraz with homework. But years later, he thanked his parents for it. Proof that sometimes Hollywood kids need a little Midwest to find their way. The drama school years, and the moment Rob realized he had a voice. Rob Reiner's true artistic awakening didn't come on a soundstage. It happened in a modest theater classroom at UCLA's School of Theater, Film and Television in the late 1960s. After high school, Reiner initially wavered between following his father, Carl Reiner's comedic footsteps, or carving his own path. It wasn't until he immersed himself in acting workshops and voice training courses at UCLA that everything clicked. In a 2017 Hollywood Reporter Roundtable, Reiner recalled a specific scene study class where a professor stopped him mid-performance, not to critique his delivery, but to point out something far deeper. You're not acting like a funny guy, you are the funny guy. Say it like you mean it. That moment, according to Reiner, lit the fire. He began viewing performance as a form of emotional truth, not just entertainment. Ironically, while his classmates aspired to Broadway, Rob started writing sketches, absorbing structure from Stanislavski, but dreaming in Mel Brooks' rhythm. It was also during these years that he met future collaborators like Richard Dreyfuss and Rob Liebman, who nudged him toward directing. Reiner later said that college taught me the technicalities, but more importantly, it helped me find my voice, not my dad's. That voice, human, witty, and always grounded, would become the signature behind This Is Spinal Tap and The American President. For a guy born into comedy royalty, it was UCLA, not Hollywood, that taught Rob how to speak with his own authority. Before All in the Family, Rob faced years of typecasting and rejection. Before Rob Reiner became a household name as the sarcastic Meathead on All in the Family, he spent years stuck in Hollywood's most frustrating limbo, being typecast as the funny friend, never quite funny enough. In the mid to late 1960s, Reiner bounced between bit roles on shows like Batman, The Andy Griffith Show, and Room 222, often playing generic hippie types or awkward intellectuals. Despite being the son of comedy royalty, doors didn't swing open. In fact, in a 2022 Deadline retrospective, Reiner revealed he was often rejected for being too Jewish, too tall, too loud, or not enough of any of those. Casting directors couldn't figure out what to do with him. Worse, his writing ambitions got dismissed. He co-wrote sketches for the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour alongside Steve Martin, but even that didn't translate into more acting work. One producer reportedly told him, "You're either behind the scenes or in front. Pick one because you're not good enough for both." Ouch. But Rob didn't give up. Instead, he leaned into his strengths: sharp timing, political edge, and a natural ease on camera. That persistence paid off in 1971 when Norman Lear took a gamble and cast him in All in the Family. Ironically, Reiner almost didn't take the role, fearing he'd be stuck playing the liberal son-in-law forever. But it became his breakout. The years of rejection had honed his instincts and taught him how to survive Hollywood without riding his father's coattails. That rejection, it ended up becoming his real training ground. How Meathead nearly killed his career, and then made it. Rob Reiner's portrayal of Michael Meathead Stivic on All in the Family from 1971 to 1978 launched him into the national spotlight, but it almost boxed him in for good. The role, a liberal, outspoken son-in-law, constantly clashing with Archie Bunker's bigotry, became iconic overnight. But by 1978, Reiner was fighting a new battle. He couldn't get cast as anything else. In interviews, he's admitted that casting agents and producers couldn't see past the character. One famously told him, "You're great, but all I see is Meathead in a turtleneck." Reiner even considered quitting acting altogether, fearing the stereotype would define his career forever. The irony? He had already won 2 Emmy Awards for the role by then and had become a fixture in American living rooms. But behind the scenes, Reiner was struggling to prove he had range and vision. So he pivoted. Quietly taking writing and directing gigs, he co-founded Castle Rock Entertainment, and in 1984 directed This Is Spinal Tap, a satire so absurdly brilliant that it instantly rebranded him. By 1986, with Stand By Me, he officially shed the Meathead label, and with When Harry Met Sally in 1989, he became one of Hollywood's most respected directors. Reiner has since reflected that the very role that threatened to freeze him became the fuel to reinvent himself. As he told NPR in 2020, "I had to become a director just to escape the shadow of my own face. Meathead made him, but only because he found a way out." Directing his first film terrified him. Then came This Is Spinal Tap. When Rob Reiner stepped onto the set of This Is Spinal Tap in 1982, he wasn't just a first-time director. He was an actor turned filmmaker who was terrified of being laughed out of the job. Despite being Carl Reiner's son and a seasoned TV performer, Rob had never helmed a feature film. Castle Rock didn't exist yet, and Hollywood wasn't exactly clamoring for a mockumentary about a fictional British heavy metal band. The idea, co-created with Christopher Guest, Michael McKean, and Harry Shearer, was risky. It relied on improvisation, satire, and a camera style few studios trusted. According to a 2023 oral history in Rolling Stone, Reiner was so nervous during the first week of filming that he barely gave direction beyond "just do it again." He even contemplated backing out. But once the team filmed the now legendary These Go to 11 amplifier scene, Reiner knew he had lightning in a bottle. His decision to play the deadpan director, Marty DeBerge, gave him an insider's grip on the tone, allowing him to balance the absurd with the believable. The result? A cult classic that now ranks in AFI's top 100 comedies. Nerd alert! The film was so convincing that many viewers initially believed Spinal Tap was a real band. Even the New York Times had to clarify. Reiner would go on to direct dramas, rom-coms, and political thrillers. But he later said Spinal Tap taught him everything about risk. "Can't direct scared," he admitted. "You just crank it up to 11 and go." How Reiner fought studio execs to make Stand By Me his way. When Rob Reiner pitched Stand By Me, a coming-of-age drama adapted from Stephen King's novella, The Body, he wasn't taken seriously at first. In 1985, studios weren't looking for slow, nostalgic stories about 4 boys walking along railroad tracks talking about death, leeches, and blueberry pie contests. They wanted action, romance, or franchises. Executives at Embassy Pictures, the film's original backer, even tried to meddle, pushing for more comedy or a romantic subplot. But Reiner stood firm. He wanted tone over spectacle and realism over gloss. According to a 2022 Collider interview, he had to threaten to walk when execs suggested changing the ending to something more upbeat. Reiner's secret weapon? A 24-minute test reel he personally edited and screened for Norman Lear, who then helped secure new financing through Columbia Pictures after Embassy dropped the film mid-production. Even casting faced resistance. Some doubted Will Wheaton and River Phoenix could carry the film emotionally, but Reiner trusted his gut, spending weeks workshopping with the kids to build natural chemistry. That gamble paid off. The film opened in 1986 to critical acclaim, later earning an Oscar nomination for Best Adapted Screenplay and a permanent place in pop culture. Fun detail, Reiner personally directed Phoenix during the iconic crying scene in the junkyard, whispering to him between takes to tap into deeper emotions. Years later, Reiner said Stand By Me was the film that proved he could direct from the heart. And ironically, it took fighting every note to let the story speak for itself. The surprising true story behind the making of The Princess Bride. The making of The Princess Bride in 1987 reads almost like a fairy tale itself, complete with near disasters, studio skepticism, and a cast that barely believed the movie would work. Rob Reiner had dreamed of adapting William Goldman's novel for years, but the script had already bounced through Hollywood purgatory for over a decade. Even legendary directors like Francois Truffaut and Robert Redford failed to get it made. It wasn't until Reiner's success with Stand By Me that he finally got the green light from 20th Century Fox, on the condition the budget stay under $16 million. Goldman, who also wrote the screenplay, was so emotionally invested that he reportedly left the set during the fire swamp scene because he couldn't bear to watch his story go wrong. Fun trivia? The Cliffs of Insanity were filmed on Ireland's Cliffs of Moher, while most of the castle interiors were shot in England using leftover Labyrinth sets. But the most surprising part? Andre the Giant, cast as Fezzik, had severe back pain during filming and couldn't lift Carrie Elwes, so Elwes was suspended on wires to fake the iconic catch scene. The film was a moderate box office success but didn't become a cultural phenomenon until the VHS era. Reiner said in a 2020 interview, the studio didn't know how to market it. It wasn't just a comedy, a romance, or a fantasy. It was everything. Today it's quoted everywhere from weddings to politics. As you wish, anyone? And its behind-the-scenes journey only adds to its mythic status. Rob Reiner's 7-year hot streak of unstoppable film hits. Between 1984 and 1992, Rob Reiner pulled off one of the most legendary streaks in Hollywood history. 7 films in a row, each a critical or commercial smash, all wildly different in genre, yet unmistakably stamped with his storytelling brilliance. It began with This Is Spinal Tap in 1984, a cult mockumentary that practically invented the genre. Then came The Sure Thing in 1985, a romantic comedy that proved John Cusack could lead. But it was Stand By Me in 1986 that made critics take Reiner seriously, earning an Oscar nod and marking his pivot into emotional, character-driven drama. He followed that with The Princess Bride in 1987, now a cultural phenomenon. Then came When Harry Met Sally in 1989, which redefined the modern rom-com and gave the world that diner scene. And as if that wasn't enough, Misery in 1990 showed he could do Stephen King horror with terrifying elegance. Kathy Bates won an Oscar. Finally, A Few Good Men in 1992, a courtroom juggernaut, grossed over $240 million and earned 4 Academy Award nominations. Fun fact, Reiner insisted on casting Tom Cruise against studio skepticism, and Cruise's I Want the Truth scene with Jack Nicholson became an instant classic. Each film was different, but all shared Reiner's signature: tight scripts, human vulnerability, and impeccable casting. As of 2025, no director has matched a 7-film run with this range and success. Martin Scorsese once said, Reiner made it look easy, but what he did was near impossible. For nearly a decade, Rob Reiner didn't miss, not once. Why When Harry Met Sally almost didn't happen. It's hard to imagine romantic comedies without When Harry Met Sally. But in 1998, the film was on the verge of collapse multiple times. Rob Reiner, fresh off the success of The Princess Bride, was hesitant to direct another love story, especially one loosely based on his own failed marriage. Nora Ephron had written the script around Reiner's famously cynical take on love, but he feared it hit too close to home. In fact, in a 2020 Vanity Fair interview, Reiner admitted he almost walked away because "I didn't want to see my neurosis on screen." He eventually came around on one condition: the ending had to be rewritten. In Ephron's original draft, Harry and Sally didn't end up together. Reiner, still emotionally raw from his divorce, insisted that real people don't just walk into happily ever after. But after falling in love again during filming, he met future wife Michelle Singer on set, he softened, and the script evolved into what's now one of the most satisfying finales in rom-com history. Casting was another hurdle. Meg Ryan wasn't the studio's first choice, and Billy Crystal's involvement worried execs who weren't sure audiences would buy him as a romantic lead. But Reiner insisted on Crystal, his longtime friend, and their real-life chemistry helped shape the film's famously unscripted moments, like the fake orgasm scene, which Ryan improvised during a lunch meeting. Today, When Harry Met Sally is a genre-defining classic, but in 1988, it was one rewrite and one lunch scene away from never being made. The on-set feud that shaped A Few Good Men. Behind the polished precision of A Few Good Men, 1992, was a creative clash that, surprisingly, helped sharpen the film's dramatic edge. Rob Reiner, directing his seventh feature, was used to calling the shots, but on this set, he found himself navigating a tense undercurrent between screenwriter Aaron Sorkin and lead actor Tom Cruise. Sorkin, then still protective of his Broadway script, often bristled when Cruise ad-libbed or tweaked dialogue, even if it was just for rhythm. According to a 2023 Entertainment Weekly oral history, there were days Sorkin refused to watch dailies, fearing his carefully crafted legalese was getting softened. Meanwhile, Jack Nicholson, already a legend, dominated the set with his brooding presence. Reiner later admitted that Nicholson's intense energy created quiet intimidation, even for Cruise. But the real friction came during the film's most iconic scene, "You Can't Handle the Truth." Nicholson delivered it with such force that Reiner actually had to ask Cruise to dial it up just to hold his own. The tension pushed Cruise into what many consider his most grounded performance up to that point. And Sorkin? He eventually acknowledged that Reiner's cinematic instincts added dimension his stage play lacked. The result was electric. The film was a box office hit, earned 4 Oscar nominations, and made courtroom thrillers cool again. Reiner once said, "Creative tension isn't always bad, it's how diamonds are made." In this case, a little behind-the-scenes heat created one of the most quotable dramas of the 90s. Reiner was once the most bankable director, and then Hollywood changed. In the early 90s, Rob Reiner wasn't just successful, he was Hollywood's most bankable director. Between This Is Spinal Tap and A Few Good Men, Reiner delivered 7 consecutive hits across wildly different genres, a feat unmatched by even Spielberg during that window. Studios trusted him, actors sought him, and audiences showed up. But after A Few Good Men earned over $240 million globally, the industry around him began to shift. By the mid-1990s, Hollywood was chasing franchises, visual effects, and global tentpoles, things Reiner wasn't interested in. His follow-up, North, in 1994, was a rare misstep. Critics panned it. Famously, Roger Ebert said, "I hated this movie. Hated this movie." And while Reiner rebounded with The American President in 1995, the box office climate had changed. Character-driven dramas, his specialty, were getting squeezed out by CGI spectacles and action thrillers. Reiner resisted the shift. He doubled down on personal, political, and relationship-based films like Ghost of Mississippi and The Story of Us. Some performed decently, others quietly disappeared. By the 2000s, Reiner's name no longer guaranteed studio financing. In interviews, he admitted to frustration, once telling Deadline in 2019, "If I pitch Stand By Me today, it will be rejected for not having a superhero in it." Still, he never chased trends. Instead, Reiner turned to indie financing and smaller projects, often politically charged, like LBJ in 2016. He might not dominate box offices anymore, but in 2025, Reiner was still seen as one of the last great narrative craftsmen, uncompromising in an era of algorithms. Behind the scenes, the films Rob Reiner turned down. Rob Reiner's career could have taken some radically different turns if he'd said yes to certain scripts that landed on his desk. In fact, behind his 7-film hot streak was a surprising pile of almosts, projects he either passed on or lost to timing. One of the most famous? Forrest Gump. Reiner was offered the chance to direct it in the early 90s, but turned it down, reportedly because he didn't connect with the story's whimsical tone. He later told Variety in 2018, "It was a great script, I just didn't see myself in it." Of course, the film went to Robert Zemeckis and swept the 1995 Oscars. He also passed on Good Will Hunting, which Ben Affleck and Matt Damon initially pitched to Castle Rock Entertainment, Reiner's production company. While Castle Rock financed the development script, Reiner felt the story leaned too heavily on the FBI subplot, an early draft quirk, and advised the writers to focus on the emotional core, a move that led them to Gus Van Sant instead. Another surprising rejection? Sleepless in Seattle. Though close friends with Nora Ephron, Reiner opted not to direct, feeling he had already covered similar emotional terrain with When Harry Met Sally. And while he considered Dead Poets Society, he ultimately passed, making room for Peter Weir. Each decision, right or wrong, shaped the unique path of Reiner's filmography. As of 2025, he still laughs about it. "I passed on a lot of Oscar winners, but I made Spinal Tap, so who really won?" Losing his mother in 2008 shook him, but inspired new purpose. When Estelle Reiner passed away in October 2008 at age 94, Rob Reiner lost more than just his mother. He lost his emotional anchor. Estelle wasn't just Carl Reiner's wife or Rob's mom. She was a jazz singer, an occasional actress. She famously delivered the punchline, "I'll have what she's having," in When Harry Met Sally, and a fierce defender of her son's creative voice. Her death hit Rob hard. In a 2009 Los Angeles Times interview, he admitted he was more gutted than I expected, especially since she remained sharp and artistically active well into her 90s. But grief soon turned into something deeper: motivation. Estelle had always encouraged Rob to speak out, not just through art but through activism. After her passing, Reiner doubled down on political engagement. In 2010, he launched the Children's Health Initiative in California, pushing for increased early childhood education funding. The same year, he became a major figure in the fight for marriage equality, co-founding the American Foundation for Equal Rights, AFER, which helped overturn Proposition 8 in federal court. Friends say Estelle's passing made Rob more introspective and even more fearless. Fun note, he once said she was the first person who told him The Princess Bride would be a classic. As of 2025, Reiner often credits his mother as the reason he uses his platform, not just to entertain but to change the world. Her final lesson? That legacy isn't just in film, it's in impact. How Rob Reiner became a reluctant political activist. Rob Reiner never set out to be a political firebrand. In fact, during the height of his directing career in the 80s and 90s, he avoided overt political statements, despite growing up in a household where his father, Carl Reiner, and family friend Mel Brooks regularly debated social justice over dinner. But everything changed in 1998 when Reiner co-founded First 5 California, a landmark initiative to fund early childhood education through tobacco taxes. It was a cause inspired by fatherhood. His youngest children were toddlers then, and by frustration that public policy wasn't matching science. That success turned into a springboard. In the 2000s, Reiner became increasingly vocal, especially on issues like marriage equality, campaign finance reform, and media ethics. He co-founded the American Foundation for Equal Rights in 2009, which brought the federal case that helped overturn California's anti-gay marriage law, Proposition 8. But what made Reiner unique was his reluctance. In a 2021 Hollywood Reporter profile, he said, "I didn't want to be that celebrity. I just wanted to fix things I saw were broken." He since donated millions to Democratic causes and helped launch organizations like the Committee to Investigate Russia in 2017. Critics call him partisan, but Reiner insists his activism is values-driven, not ideological. He doesn't tweet for the applause. He funds court cases, hires lawyers, and gets involved in the machinery of policy. As of 2025, he was still using his Hollywood weight to push for voting rights protections. What started as reluctant advocacy became a second legacy, one just as impactful as his films. Rob Reiner's son Jake reveals a hidden truth Hollywood tried to bury. In 2023, Jake Reiner, Rob Reiner's journalist son and former KNBC TV reporter, shocked even longtime fans when he publicly opened up about a little-known truth regarding his father's early career struggles. Rob Reiner was nearly blacklisted in the early 70s for his outspokenness against the Vietnam War and the Nixon administration. According to Jake, who spoke on the Recounts Democracy podcast, studio execs once labeled his father as difficult and too politically loud for a sitcom star, especially after Reiner marched in major LA protests while filming All in the Family. CBS executives even urged Norman Lear to rein in Meathead, fearing Reiner's real-life activism would bleed into the already controversial show. Jake revealed that his father was deeply hurt but defiant, refusing to back down. What Hollywood tried to bury, his willingness to speak truth to power, ended up defining his second act as a director and activist. The story had largely been kept quiet to protect Reiner's chances in Reagan-era Hollywood, where political actors often got fewer offers. Jake's commentary reintroduced the public to that hidden chapter, aligning with Rob's own 2024 memoir, Truth Has a Voice, which confirmed the blacklist rumors and detailed his clashes with CBS brass. As of 2025, the father-son duo grew closer than ever, even collaborating on political media projects. Jake once joked, "He was always Meathead to them, but to me, he was just the guy who taught me how to stand up, even when it costs you work." That's a legacy Hollywood couldn't erase. The court case that made Reiner a champion for marriage equality. Rob Reiner's evolution from filmmaker to fierce LGBTQ+ rights advocate crystallized with one groundbreaking legal battle: Perry versus Schwarzenegger, the federal case that challenged California's Prop 8 on same-sex marriage. In 2008, when voters passed Prop 8, Reiner and his wife Michelle were outraged. But instead of posting hashtags or giving sound bites, they went tactical. Reiner co-founded the American Foundation for Equal Rights, recruiting powerhouse attorneys Ted Olson, a conservative, and David Boyce, a liberal, the same legal rivals from Bush versus Gore, to take the case all the way to the federal court. It was a strategic masterstroke. In 2010, under Judge Vaughn Walker, the trial began. Reiner attended nearly every day, quietly sitting in the back, funding the effort largely out of his own pocket. AFER refused to make it a celebrity circus. Instead, they focused on airtight constitutional arguments, equal protection, due process, and the human cost of discrimination. In 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court let a lower court ruling stand, effectively ending Prop 8 and restoring marriage equality to California, 2 years before the BOMBSHELL versus Hodges decision legalized it nationwide. Reiner's involvement wasn't performative. He didn't just fund the case, he produced a play based on the court transcripts, 8, written by Dustin Lance Black, ensuring the trial's emotional weight reached audiences even when it wasn't televised. As of 2025, Reiner called it the most important work I've ever done. For a man who gave us Stand By Me, that says everything. Why he walked away from big-budget films for a decade. By the early 2000s, Rob Reiner had earned the right to direct anything. With hits like When Harry Met Sally, A Few Good Men, and The Princess Bride under his belt, studios courted him endlessly. But after a string of underperforming films, Alex and Emma in 2003, Rumor Has It in 2005, and The Bucket List in 2007, Reiner made a conscious decision to step away from the high-stakes, high-pressure world of big-budget studio filmmaking. The shift wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, and deeply intentional. In a 2022 interview with The New Yorker, Reiner revealed he was burnt out on the politics of the business, frustrated by corporate interference, marketing-driven development, and risk-averse executives. Hollywood had changed. Studios prioritized franchises, cinematic universes, and billion-dollar tentpoles. Reiner's human-scaled, dialogue-driven stories no longer fit the market mold. Rather than bend, he pivoted to independent filmmaking. His company, Castle Rock, shifted focus to niche, socially relevant projects. He directed Flipped in 2010, A gentle coming-of-age story distributed through Warner Brothers, but made on a shoestring budget. Later came Being Charlie in 2015, inspired by his son's battle with addiction. Raw, personal, and completely outside the studio system. During this period, Reiner also ramped up political activism, investing time and money into causes like voter protection and marriage equality. He didn't disappear, he just redirected his energy. As of 2025, Reiner said he didn't regret the slowdown. The movies got bigger, but the hearts got smaller, he told THR. I needed to do work that meant something, to me, not just to a spreadsheet. Thanks for watching Past Paradise, where Hollywood legends come home. If you enjoyed today's look into Rob Reiner's son, Jake, reveals a hidden truth Hollywood tried to bury, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell.